Today we're going to be talking about converting decimals to percents. So this is the class notes that I have on my website. If you need them, go to my website, download them, print them out, fill them out as I fill them out right here in this video. Here it goes. In order for us to convert a decimal to a percent, we need to know what percent means. And percent, as you can see right here, the word percent means a ratio. And it's not just any ratio, it's a ratio that compares a number to 100. Always 100. It's a ratio that compares a number to 100. Ratio that compares a number. But now you should already know how to convert fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions. Okay, so it comes to no surprise that this 700ths is 700ths. Does that make sense? 700ths as a fraction is 700ths as a decimal. It's the same thing. And the percent would be 7%. And here's why. Let's take for instance 7%. 7% means 7 out of 100. Okay? So if we're going to write this as a fraction, 7 out of 100, that's the ratio, then we can also say that 7 right here, that's in my hundreds place. Okay, remember, this one right here, the 0, that's the tens place. This is the hundreds place. Okay, as a matter of fact, any number, this n%, let's say you have 23%, to write it as a fraction or to write it as a ratio, really is just 23 compared to 100. So my fraction for 23% is going to be 23 hundredths. Any other number, we will have 7, let's do 4. 4% means 4 out of 100. Now, if I was asking you for the lowest term fraction, if I asked you to give me the fraction that's equivalent to 4%, you wouldn't give me 4 over 100. You would simplify by dividing by 4 the numerator and the denominator. 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 100 divided by 4 is 25. So this would be the equivalent fraction in this case. Okay? Hopefully you have all this written down. If you need more time, pause at this time and then write it down and then keep going. If you need me to rewind, or if you need me to say this again, just rewind and then make sure you understand it. Now I'm going to scroll down. These are the grids. If I ask you to model something, if I ask you to model, this is what modeling is, model the decimals and the percents. We have 2 decimals and 3 percents that we have to model. I'm going to help you out with this one, and I'm going to help you out with this one. I want you to do the other 3 by yourselves. Okay, so let's do a 0.08 and clear that, and I'm going to zoom in so that really clear. And what I'm going to do here, in order for us to model 8 in the hundredths place, we have to read it correctly, which is going to be not 8.08 or 0.08, but rather 8 in the hundredths place is read as 8 hundredths, which means 8 out of 100, which makes it 8%. So if we're going to model this, all we have to do is shade in 8. Let's see, we're going to shade 8 of them. That's 5, 6, 7, 8. That's it. So this is 8%. Not hard, right? You have 100 little squares. All you need to do is shade in 8. 8 out of 100. Alright? Let's go down. Let's go over to the next one. The other one is 50%, 53%. Now we don't have a decimal, now we have a percent. Remember, percent means out of 100, so if I want to model this fraction, it's going to be 53 out of 100. That means I have to shade in 53 of these little squares. And that's not hard to do. All that I do is shade in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those rows, because each row has 10, so that right now I've shaded 50% or half of the whole grid. And if I do 3 more squares, that gives me the equivalent of 53%. Maybe I can make it better for you guys. If I go over it again, you can see it a little bit better. Okay, how's that? Alright, there it is, 53%. That's how you model fractions. Now I'm going to scroll down, and you can turn your page over. And what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to convert the percents to the decimals. So this is my percent, and if you can, I'm going to zoom out real quick so you can see all 3 columns here. And in order for us to do this, all we have to do is go from the percent to the fraction. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple of this with you, and then you can do the other 2 by yourself, the 3 by yourself. So 45%. 45%, remember that means 45 out of 100. And as a decimal, if you read this fraction correctly, is 45 hundredths. Well, in decimals, we use our place values. The first place value, that's the tenths. The second place value, that's the hundredths. So that's the last decimal place we want to have. So that's where the 5 is going to go, and this is where the 4 is going to go. So this is my decimal for 45%. 45% is equal to 45 hundredths. Okay, the fraction for 7% is 7 out of 100. To go to the decimal, again, 7 hundredths is, if you read it correctly, is the name of this fraction. So that 7 needs to be in the hundredths place, and we can fill in a 0 in the tenths place. So this is 7 hundredths. This decimal right here is equivalent to this percent right there. Okay, I'm going to do this other one with you right here, 125%. 125%. Remember, percent, that little symbol right here, and if I were you, I would write this down right now. Percent always means out of 100. That's the big number right there. Anytime, I really can't stress this enough, anytime you see the symbol, you need to remember this number, 100. Percent means out of 100. So if I'm going to do 125%, that's going to be 125 out of 100. Okay? I know this is an improper fraction, but guess what? That's going to help us to write it as a decimal. Here's how we write it as a decimal. Remember, 125 hundredths. That means that my last place, my decimal place, that has to be filled in is this one right here, the hundredths place. Okay, so if I'm going to write this decimal, the last one has to be the 5, which means this one has to be the 2. And guess what? That 1 has to be in front of the decimal. So this is the equivalent decimal to 125%. And it makes sense because this means you have more than 100%. This means you have more than 1 whole. So both of them are equivalent. Okay? Now we're going to talk about leaving fractions like improper fraction like this. We're going to talk about that later. We don't want to leave it as an improper fraction if I was asking you for the fraction form. But I'm not asking you for the fraction form in this video. In this video, all we're doing is converting percents to decimals. Okay, we're going from percents all the way over here to decimals. But we're writing it as a fraction first and then as a decimal because that helps us see the decimal really quickly. Now if I scroll down a little bit, it's going to ask you, do you see a pattern? Let me go back to the other page I was just in. Is there a pattern here? Do you see a pattern? From the percent column all the way over to the decimal column? Do you see a pattern from being 45% to 45 hundredths? From 7% to 7 hundredths? From 125% to 1.25 or 1 and 25 hundredths. If you haven't noticed it yet, I'm gonna write it in for you. Okay? There's a decimal right here. There's a decimal right there. And there's a decimal right there. All of these percentages are whole numbers, which means that the decimal is sitting right here in this location. any whole number can be written down with a decimal behind it. I'm going to ask you this tomorrow. Where is the decimal in a whole number? And you have to tell me is right behind it. Okay, for example, $5, that's 5 whole dollars. But if I want to write it with a decimal though, I can write it with $5.00. I don't have to put a decimal in this location, but I know it's there. Okay, I don't have to put it there, but I know it's there. So that's what I mean about the whole numbers always having a decimal behind the number itself. So if you notice this decimal, look what happened. It moves over once, it moves over twice to the left. It moves over once, and it moves over twice to the left. And you can fill in a 0, and look at what you end up with. 0.07. Oh, that's the same thing as this one, 0.07. Let's look over here. We move this decimal over twice. You end up with 1.25. Oh, that's this answer right here. Okay, so hopefully you've noticed that pattern, and if you hadn't, now you do. The short way that I could teach my students how to remember this is with that popular drink called Dr. Pepper. And we're going to talk about that in the next section of these notes. When we go to from decimals, whoops, let me erase that right quick. When we go from decimals to percents, notice those two letters right there, the D and the P. Well, that's one of my favorite drinks, Dr. Pepper. And not because I like the actual drink, but because it helps me remember the shortcut to go from decimal to a percent. Let's do the fraction right quick. 8, and remember this is in the hundreds place, so this is read as 8 over 100. Okay, so that means 8 out of 100. Oh yeah, that's my ratio. Out of 100 means percent, so that's my 8%. 6.6. Uh-oh, that's in the tens place. What do you think is going to be over here in the hundreds place? A 0. You can fill it out like this, and then you can just write it as 60 over 100. What percent is that? 60%. If you didn't fill this out that way, here's the other way you could have done this one. And I want you to leave it like I have it just now, if you understand it that way. But if you don't understand it that way, here's what I mean. If this is 0.6, that's in the tens place, well, write it as over 10, 6/10. Now, the only way I can get to 100 down here, so I can have a percent, is if I multiply this 10 times 10. 10 times 10 gives me 100, and if I do that to the denominator, I have to do that to the numerator, so that I can keep the numbers equal. And 6 times 10 is 60, so I end up with 60%. Okay, now I'm not going to finish the rest, you can finish the rest, but here's what I mean by Dr. Pepper. Look what happened to the decimal. It moved over to the right 2 places, where my decimal is sitting here behind the 8. Here I move it over twice as well, and I have to fill in a 0, and my decimal is sitting right there. That's how I come up with 60%. So if you want to know the shortcut, just remember Dr. Pepper. But what you're really doing is you're writing it as a fraction and then changing it to a percent. Dr. Pepper just tells us that if we're going from decimal to percent, we grab that decimal and we go from D to the P. We go 2 places to the right, we end up with the percent. In the previous case right here, this is the top part of your notes, you were going to the left, because if you write Dr. Pepper, here we were going from the percent to the decimal. So we're going from the P to the D. We're doing Pepper Doctor if you think about it. So you start with the P and you're going to the D. Okay, so Dr. Pepper helps you because it tells you which way you move the decimal. All right.